Hello and welcome to today's Cabinet meeting of Oxford City Council, taking place on Wednesday, the 21st of January at the Town Hall. We start with apologies for absence, and I am not aware of any. I believe Councillor Anna Railton and Councillor Ed Turner are joining us, maybe a few minutes late. Declarations of interest. Has anyone got any? Not seeing any, so thank you very much. Can we approve the minutes of the previous meeting? Has anyone got any corrections they need to make? No, not seeing any. So we formally agree those as an accurate record. We move therefore on to item 4 on the agenda, addresses by members of the public, and we do have an address by a member of the public. I'm hoping that one of you is that member of the public. So I believe it's Mr. Dominic Woodfield. Yep. Please do step up to the table here. When you press the button on the right, this will go red and that means you're on. So, but if you could do that, and over to you. Thank you.
Okay, can you all hear me okay? Shall I kick off? Okay. So I address you on behalf of Friends of Iffley Village, but also as an ecological and environmental planning consultant with long-standing experience of the local plan process and the concept of soundness. I wish to explain why I and many others believe strongly that your Planning Policy Department's proposed retention of the land at Meadow Lane Iffley site allocation, which is SPS 8, is unsound, and why the allocation should be deleted and the land properly and belatedly zoned as a vital part of the city's green infrastructure network. This is a site that this council has rejected as unsuitable twice previously. It passed muster in the preparation of the last local plan only due to a series of technical and procedural errors. Surveys since 2021 have outed these errors, revealing beyond question that this is a site of at least citywide importance for nature conservation, comfortably meeting the criteria for formal designation and harbouring rare, scarce and protected species. The recently published Local Nature Recovery Strategy for Oxfordshire duly recognises this importance. These ancient meadows are also a designated and integral part of Iffley's conservation area, close to the Thames and partly in Flood Zone 3. Any development would require road traffic to be introduced along a designated principal and very popular quiet route for active travel, which adjoins the site, directly compromising its function and value for non-car transport. Applying the Council's criteria for green space multifunctionality, which is in your agenda pack, page 109 to 110, not only does this site tick all 6 environmental functions, but also several social, health and well-being functions and economic functions, giving a total score of 13 out of 17. With such a high score, it's clear that the meadow should be rezoned and protected as a core green space under policy G1A. The unsuitability of this site for development is further reflected in the Council's own sustainability appraisal process. The relevant sustainability appraisal site assessment forms, which are at pages 664 to 670 of the agenda report, demonstrate that compared to other sites in the emerging plan, the land at Meadow Lane site is a clear outlier with 15 negative flags raised against it, 2 red, conservation and biodiversity, and 13 amber, including flood risk, access and transport, and poor use of land. These constraints act cumulatively to provide no certainty of delivery of any housing, hence the absurd 0 figure in the proposed allocation. The next most sensitive site, with 11 negative flags, is the Cassam Overflow Car Park, SPS 11, which is a previously developed site dominated by hardstanding, is in no way comparable and will actually deliver a substantive number of homes, 100. Moreover, the sustainability appraisal, as damning as it already is, remains infected by factual errors and very questionable assumptions carried over from its flawed Local Plan 2036 predecessor. That's despite these having been highlighted via 2 rounds of consultation feedback. For example, the appraisal still fails to accurately note or record that the ancient meadows are an integral part of the Iffley Conservation Area, which is of course about protecting setting as well as material structures. The meadow is a crucial part of that setting. Further, the list of notable ecological features, whilst correctly now mentioning that the site is of at least city wildlife site status, fails to mention that the site is wholly within the Local Nature Recovery Strategy, not just part of it, as the appraisal and draft policy claims. These are base errors, and their correction will worsen the site's sustainability score still further. So this Cabinet is presented with an opportunity to rectify these past and ongoing mistakes. There can be no remaining question that it was a mistake to allocate land at Meadow Lane for housing in Local Plan 2036. The Council's own work on pursuing a planning application and its abandonment of a minimum target for the delivery of homes at this location merely exposes the magnitude of that mistake and the extent to which this meadow is an unsuitable and unsustainable site for any development. Circumstances around housing need have also changed considerably since the 2036 local plan was adopted. The availability of sites for residential delivery has expanded via redundant retail and long unused commercial, new employment site policies and expansion into the Greenbelt that could bring a vast number of new homes. Meanwhile, the severity of the climate and ecological emergencies has worsened, and the mental and physical health of children and young people has become a more acute issue. And that is related to their diminishing contact with nature, for which there is little structured provision for them in this city. To that, there is a growing support for an alternative beneficial use of the meadows in Iffley as a dedicated, safe site for outdoor recreation to benefit the learning and well-being of young people in East Oxford, where there are very high rates of deprivation. At just under a hectare, the meadow is large enough to accommodate managed footfall, whilst at the same time protecting and enhancing its important biodiversity. Supporting agencies are poised to secure funding for the delivery of this initiative at little or no cost to the council, and includes the local wildlife trust, who are actively pursuing a heritage lottery bid for funding to actually run this outdoor education facility. To conclude, there is simply no policy or moral justification for reallocating land at Meadow Lane in the draft local plan 2045. Please remove it so that the draft plan can go forward for adoption on a sound basis, and so that the outdoor education proposal can be advanced. This would be a win not just for sustainability, but also a win for this council, because it would demonstrate that it's capable of recognising and reacting to changed circumstances and is genuinely forward-thinking in the planning the future resilience of this city. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Woodfield. I hand over to Councillor Alex Hollingsworth, who may address this now or when moving the local plan report.
Yes, my only response is that I'm well aware that the technical expertise of what's been expressed goes far beyond mine. I will ask for council officers to address it when we get to the item on the report.
Thank you very much. It's coming up fairly soon on the agenda, so if you want to take a seat again, we will get to it as soon as we can. Thank you very much. We don't have any planned addresses from councillors on items for decision on the Cabinet agenda or on neighbourhood issues or items raised by Cabinet members. So that takes us on to item 8, reports from the Scrutiny Committee. Alex, over to you.
Thank you very much. The Scrutiny Committee met on the 13th of January, where we considered 2 items, the Workforce Equality Update and then, of course, the proposed submission of the draft local plan. I shall first address the Workforce Equality Update. During the discussion, I think members of the committee were very, very keen to recognise that there had been positive progress on workforce diversity and that there was some good practice going on around the introduction of anonymised applications. We also welcomed the development of anonymised reporting of employment-related issues around bullying and harassment. And there was, however, some concern that the EHRC interim guidance around trans and non-binary staff might have an effect on our staff in future, and questions around whether there were sufficient staff networks in place. Off the back of that discussion, there were 3 recommendations. The first of these was that the current target for workforce representation of 17% of employees from minority ethnic groups be increased to a higher evidence-based figure in order to strengthen the council's recruitment from these groups. Secondly, we recommended that Cabinet fully implement an anonymised third-party reporting system reflecting standard practice across the public and private sectors, and that this would enable employees to raise concerns relating to harassment, bullying, discrimination, corruption, other workplace issues with confidence. And thirdly, whilst acknowledging that there are challenges posed around numbers of staff and the reliability of data, Scrutiny was keen to encourage that future workforce equality reports include a dedicated section on gender reassignment, recognising that this is a protected characteristic. I shall pause there because that's the end of that item.
Thank you very much, Alex. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, we had a good discussion in scrutiny about this report. I think one of the best discussions actually we've had over the last few years. So thank you very much for that. We accept that we need to look at the formal target and push it up a little bit, but it has to be realistic. So we're going to go away and think about what that number should be. I'm very sympathetic to the idea of a third-party anonymised reporting system for staff around issues of harassment, bullying, discrimination, corruption, and so on. I mean, this is pretty standard stuff actually in public service organisations. It's relatively small amounts of money. So I think that should go ahead, please. And finally, we had a good discussion about staff who are in the process of gender reassignment. We had a discussion about numbers versus sort of qualitative data, and we are on the side of qualitative data, not least because there are very small numbers of staff involved, and B, it's about growing confidence that people can feel able to speak up about these issues. And the feedback we're getting is that people are happy to do that in small numbers, but they don't really want an aggregated number of people in this category published. And I think we need to respect that, frankly. And we don't want to do anything which makes it harder for people to have confidence in us in terms of speaking up about their issues. So yes, and in part is the answer.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Back over to you, Alex.
Thank you. So turn now to discuss the local plan. So again, I think the committee had a really full discussion on this, and I should say both on this and on the previous item, thank you to Nigel, Alex and the officer teams for what was quite possibly the longest scrutiny meeting we'd ever had. So it was really good to see everyone engaged for such a long time. But on the local plan, there was a lot of discussion around local centres, particularly requests for clarifications around how that designation came to be and how, for example, some areas had come to be recognised as local centres, but other areas weren't yet so recognised. So there were particular discussions around whether Dunnock's Way and Greater Leys could be considered, and whether there would be areas as well, possibly within Littlemore, that might be suitable for recognition as a local centre. There were questions around the sufficiency of affordable housing and whether we could aim for a higher proportion of social rent. There were also a lot of concerns over high density of hot food takeaways in district centres, and whether proximity to schools is considered in restricting new takeaways. There was some discussion of the removal of the Meadow Lane allocation as addressed by the public speaker during this meeting. There were some broader concerns around the need to ensure that the local plan properly considered the needs of children and young people. And this culminated in 4 recommendations. The first of these was to ask officers to go away and undertake a further review of the areas in Greater Leys, particularly Dunnock Way, and other sites around Littlemore, whether these could be allocated local centres under Policy C1, noting their similarities to current local centres like Underhill Circus. Secondly, we recommended that the evidence base is thoroughly examined to determine whether 10% biodiversity net gain is conclusively the most ambitious minimum the council could set. Third, we recommended that officers are asked to explore whether a higher threshold for the acceptability of loss of sports facilities could be incorporated into the local plan. And fourth, we recommended that officers reconsider the language in policy C2H, encouraging the development of city centre play amenity. And just again to record, members felt that the technical planning advice in future could incorporate a greater focus on children's broader needs and whether this could be captured at some stage during the process, but noting that it was too complicated to make a recommendation about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Over to other Alex.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a really interesting discussion, I should say. The Scrutiny Committee asked interesting, wise and challenging questions, and I think that is something which we were very grateful for. Of the 4 specific recommendations, members of the Cabinet and indeed members of the Council will be familiar that essentially this question has been raised by every single local plan this council has ever considered, And so in this particular instance, the officers will be looking at this. We are working obviously within what the NPPF and other guidance says we can and cannot do. It has distinct definitions of town centres and district centres. Local centres is slightly hazier, but we do need to be consistent. We cannot include things because like people would like to include them. There's got to be some kind of logic that sits underneath them in order to justify why something is in and when something is not. So officers are considering that and thinking about how to address that particular issue. On the second recommendation, that the evidence base is thoroughly examined to determine whether the 10% biodiversity net gain is conclusively the most ambitious minimum the council could set. Officers have indeed done that, and it is very definitely the most ambitious minimum that the council could set. The policies obviously encourage greater than 10%, but it sets a minimum. We do not have the evidence that will support in a public inquiry, in a hearing with a planning inspector. It will fail the test of soundness, which was mentioned earlier, were we to increase that, but clearly to look for potential developers, landowners to come forward with higher than 10% if they possibly can. Or similarly on the sports facilities issue, the local plan as proposed is already going further than the NPPF, so we are setting higher thresholds than we're required to do. We do not think it is possible to go beyond what we're already doing. Again, it's got to be justified and supported, but that has been reviewed closely. And on the language of policy C2H, we were asked to reconsider the language, and we have reconsidered it, and I think it is absolutely appropriate as it is currently worded. And I think the reason for that is that some of the members of scrutiny were in effect asking for a site allocation policy for a city centre play area, even though no site exists, so we couldn't have a site allocation policy. There are certainly sites, they happen to be on the public highway, they may require planning permission should something be proposed on one of those sites and brought forward in the usual way. But without a specific site, it was quite difficult to have specific policies. This policy covers all the centres, not just the city centre, and having something that is specific to the city centre seems inappropriate. There is a broader issue about how one treats children and play as separate things in planning policy. And this is a slightly philosophical point, perhaps. My view is there is a risk if one treats children as separate to all other forms of human and play as an activity solely for children, that one potentially is separating off, and there's lots of interesting philosophical discussion on that. I think the wording that we have in policy C2, little paragraph H, which says where people can stop, dwell, socialise and play, is sufficiently broad to clearly indicate a support for play area, and you can see there's references to other policies as well, policy G1 and policy G2, for example, in the proposed local plan, and I think the right balance is being struck.
Thank you very much, Alex and Hollingsworth, and thank you also very much, Alex Powell, and for the work of Scrutiny Committee on these items. It sounds like you had very productive discussions on both. So thank you very much. And as always, you're welcome to stay for the end of the meeting or not, as you prefer. So thank you very much. Right, back to the agenda. We are now on to item 9, housing revenue account rent setting. And I see Jason Jones is online, but I hand over to you, Linda, to present the report. And I believe Neris is in the room as well. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think all members of Cabinet will be acutely aware of the ongoing cost of living crisis. And I wish we didn't have to raise council house rents at all, but unfortunately, we do. You'll remember from our HRA business plan, which we've approved, There is a need to maximise income coming into the housing revenue account, and that's necessary so we can continue to provide a good service to residents living in our homes, being responsive when they need repairs or services from the council. We need to do that so we can continue to invest in our council properties, and there's another report later on in the agenda which sets out some of the scale of that investment that we'll be making over the next 5 years in our council homes. And we need to do that because we need to continue to invest in new homes as well, because Oxford needs new homes, especially affordable homes. And we're one of the main people in the city in a position to be able to provide those. So we are recommending, the paper this evening recommends a rise of 4.8%, which is CPI plus 1%, in order to keep the rents up with inflation and make sure we have got the funds to continue investing in all those areas that we need to. We still don't have news about rent convergence, but yes, the report gives us space to raise legacy rents where people have been in the property for a long time and are paying less than people that are moving into a home now would pay when a new tenancy is created. People that have been in their homes for a long time are sometimes paying a much lower rent, and that's because of policy decisions taken by previous governments about not allowing councils to raise rents previously, and the way that rents have decisions have been taken in the past about how much to raise rent. So it's important that we can start to address that anomaly and create a fairer situation where we have rent convergence between newer residents and older residents. And as soon as we hear the news from the government about how much we're allowed to increase those legacy rents by, we'll know whether we can do that by £1 a week or £2 a week. This report sets out that if we are allowed to raise it by £2 a week, that is what we will seek to do. Yeah, just finally, I'd like to say, despite this rise, the average social rent charged by this council next year, it will be £143.40, which is both still a genuinely affordable rent, and also I think represents really good value for money. So on that basis, recommending we agree this report tonight.
Thank you, Linda, for that very thorough introduction. Jason, did you want to add anything?
No, nothing to add. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you. Open to questions then and comments. I'm not seeing any. Oh, Lubina, yeah.
I just wanted to ask you about the legacy rent. So like where people have been paying what they have, and then is it going to be like a major jump for them or not?
So depending on what the government allows us to do, it will be a rise of either £1 a week or £2 a week on top of the 4.8% that all of the rents will be going up by.
Thank you, Linda. And I must say, I think trying to get rent convergence is important because it does feel quite unfair at the moment. People are paying very different rents at the moment for the same property, just based on the number of years that they've been in a particular property, and that doesn't feel right. So thank you for that. I am not seeing any further questions or comments. So I suggest we move to the recommendations. They are set out in the report. There are 5 recommendations which all relate to the increase in rent and service charges. Can we agree the recommendations are set out in the report?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I should at this point say that I have, it has been drawn to my attention that Councillor Ed Turner did give his apologies for this meeting, so apologies that I did not pass those on. So can we do that? Thank you. Right, we are now at item 10, which is the proposed submission draft Oxford Local Plan 2045. So over to Councillor Hollingsworth to introduce that. And I believe we have in the room Sarah and Natalie. And so do come and sit up at the table. Over to you, Alex.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will be quite brief. I am conscious that the local plan draft will go to full council. 15 odd seconds ago, I'm aware that there will be many amendments proposed and that those I am not aware of yet, and I will have rather a small number of hours on a full working day to respond to them. So that will be occupying my time rather than greeting new students, I guess. That seems to be the alternative. Which is my living, I should say. So a very brief introduction. Where we are at with local plan is this will be the final consultation stage before it goes to a planning inspector for the full public hearing process. The last local plan, so the current local plan, as you know, was adopted in June 2020, which is more than 5 years ago. That has an impact, which you will be aware, that we now have a local plan that is more than 5 years old, and that has technical impacts. It's not terribly realistic that it makes any significant changes, but it does mean that the technical change to the way our housing land supply is calculated is in effect, and as a result we have significantly less than the required 5-year housing land supply currently. You will also be aware that we had a very good local plan drafted and went for its public hearing some while ago, and for rather technical reasons over the calculation of the housing need, that was rendered as not appropriate, I think is probably the best way of describing it, and so we're going through this process again. The elements I would draw attention to is that there are some policy changes between that draft local plan which this council approved and this one, but they are not hugely significant. The government is currently in the consultation phase of a new NPPF, where they've changed all the structure and some of the policies quite significantly, but the current NPPF is still in play, and that is what this local plan would need to be in line with. So I think I would conclude by drawing your attention to, and I did have the page number, but I've now mislaid it. So it's one of the many hundreds of pages, which I'm sure you've read firmly, the housing need. So in broad terms, I think as we are very well aware, housing need in Oxford, the current boundaries of Oxford, is very significant, and it comes at over 1,000 units a year are needed. That is the housing need. Our ability to meet that is rather less than 1,000. I'm very conscious that it was raised in the address earlier on, and so I'll ask officers to pick up that detail. But it is significantly less, our ability to meet that. So we still have an unmet housing need, which we will need to be in discussion with our neighbouring authorities, the other district councils. They generously met that unmet housing need for our last local plan, the 2036 local plan, and we will need to go through that process again. The reason for highlighting that is, and clearly we can touch on a particular site which has been raised. That gap is many thousands of units, not a very small number, but a very large number. And we have plan policies in this plan which are very much the same as they were in the 2036 local plan, that employment sites can all be developed for housing subject to other appropriate tests. It's often those of us who've been in debates in full council many times will have heard it suggested that somehow there's an expansion of employment sites. There is no expansion of housing site employment sites in this plan, nor was there in the last one, and that these employment sites are protected and cannot be built on. That wasn't true about the 2036 plan. It's not true about this one. There may be reasons they might be in a flood zone, for example, a 3B flood zone, which will make them unusable for residential use, but they do all have some potential for that should the landowner wish to pursue it. And it's important to bear in mind, this is a local plan. It is a provision of planning policy. It isn't the council controlling land that belongs to other people necessarily. So with that context, I'm very happy to try and field questions or comments, but I shall now pass over to officers who will introduce the more technical elements of it and address the public address that's been raised. It raises the same issues that were raised at scrutiny, and I'm sure the response here will be not dissimilar to the response at scrutiny, but I think it will be helpful for us to hear it.
Thank you, Alex. Sarah and Natalie, over to you.
Thank you. There's probably not very much technical to add, but I can give the detail of the housing numbers in terms of our need and our capacity. So the need, as Councillor Hollings was said, is just over 1,000 a year. Over our plan period, 20-year plan period, it's 21,740 new homes are needed. We have done as much work as we can identifying capacity within the city for housing, and have identified over the plan period potential for 9,267 homes. So that leaves an unmet housing need being generated by the city of 12,478 homes. So as part of the local plan process, we need to be able to show that it's likely that those homes can be taken in neighbouring authorities. We need to have continuous discussions, as has been happening with the neighbours, about this unmet need. And they have been formally requested to help meet this need. And we should be going out to consultation or being approved with a interim statement of common ground with the districts. But to be on a good basis for those discussions, we are always being challenged to show that we are doing all that we can to find housing within the city. Obviously, always in the best interests of the city and bringing forward development that makes it a good place to live and that meets other needs as well. So always a balance, but there is a big pressure to find housing sites. So shall I move on to the addressing the public address? So the allocation at Meadow Lane was found sound in the Oxford Local Plan 2036. The site had been rejected in previous plans, but a rejection of a site at one point in time doesn't mean that it can never be allocated. It's not the only site in the plan that had at one point previously been rejected. Needs change and plan strategies change, and we look at sites according to the emerging strategy of the plan. So the meadows are within the designated Iffley Conservation Area, and in all of the background relating to the site, the sensitivity of the conservation area is acknowledged and of the site in relation to that, but it is considered there's potential for a scheme that responds sensitively and appropriately to this setting. The quiet route for active travel is along a road that does already have traffic. Traffic impacts would need to be investigated for detailed proposals as part of any detailed proposals, but there's no reason to suppose that a suitable scheme can't come forward. Traffic generated is likely to be very limited and suitable for the surrounding roads. And there's not been an access issue raised to the allocation from the County Council as Highways Authority. the site didn't meet the criteria to be part of the core green infrastructure network. It's not publicly accessed or used. It is in a conservation area, but that in itself doesn't make it part of the core network, or of course mean that it can't be developed. It's not a designated wildlife site, and there is only a small area of flood risk on the site, which wouldn't prevent it from being developed. The sustainability appraisal form flags that there are sensitivities on the site that would require mitigation. Each criteria needs individual consideration as to whether a suitable mitigation is likely to be possible. And these identified sensitivities and associated mitigations are drawn from the sustainability appraisal into the policy of the plan itself. There's not a weight of scores in the sustainability appraisal that mean a site shouldn't be developed of red scores. It's a case of looking at each individual criterion. So the appraisal does note the conservation area. Being a green space in a conservation area, even when it's part of its setting, does not in and of itself mean that there's no development possible. In terms of the the LNRS, we have looked at that again, and the whole site is within the LNRS mapping, so we can update that, but it has no material impact on consideration of the site. I'm just trying to see if I've got any points outstanding. So, as mentioned at the beginning, in terms of the housing need and housing crisis, there's not a change in circumstances from the previous plan. There's still a limited availability of housing sites in the city and a pressure to look at all potential opportunities. It's still vital, no stone is left unturned in the search for housing sites. So, when considering whether to allocate the site, the undetermined application is not a relevant consideration in and of itself. The further work undertaken to support that is relevant, and it has shown more biodiversity interest than we previously knew about for the Local Plan 2036. That is the case, but there is still likely potential for a development of the site that responds to this appropriately. We have removed the minimum number because of the greater understanding of the wildlife value on the site, because that allows a free response to those sensitivities. And that's not to say a scheme bringing forward the previous minimum wouldn't be suitable. That's not tested. But for an allocation, in response to that, we have removed a minimum housing requirement.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was really clear. And so just to check that I understand this correctly, there was one aspect there which you talked about, the local nature recovery strategy, which you're acknowledging that the person addressing us, Mr. Woodfield, raised in his address. That will be amended in the local plan that we, if we agree it today, that will be amended before it goes to council, or is that not possible?
It won't be amended before it goes to council, but it can be amended. It will be amended for the consultation version.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Right, open to questions and comments. Alex.
Well, I was waiting for the technical advice. As I said, my technical expertise is not that of either the person who addressed us from the public or indeed our own officers. But I did want to reflect on the advice we have received. There are two elements to it which I think are important. Element number one is the detail, such as the question you just asked. There are not grounds that our officers have put forward for the removal of this site. Now, every site, of course, is subject to challenge during the public inquiry, public hearing process by the planning inspector, and I've no doubt the inclusion of this site would be challenged just as any other site potentially faces that. But there is no advice that we are receiving which suggests that it should be taken out for a technical reason. There is then, I think, the much broader issue, which is that we are whether duty to cooperate is quite the right phrase anymore since the government changed the definitions here. But we clearly have a very, very significant unmet housing need, which the numbers, just to remind you, are we require 21,740 homes to be built during the lifetime of this local plan, and we have sites which have the capacity to meet around 9,267 of those, meaning our neighbouring authorities will have to find sites for 12,473. There is two elements to that gap which we need to take into account. The one is, if I were a South Oxfordshire council, and they are the one likely to find the largest number, or Cherwell, I would not be happy if this council removed sites from its local plan within the city because it wanted to, and then expected them to meet a higher number. I don't think I would be terribly impressed with that, and I'm not sure a planning inspector would be terribly impressed either. The other is that there is clear government advice that we have to look at every single potential site, and if the landowner is willing for it to be put forward and there are not reasons to remove it, such as it being in the floodplain or, as with a site in Marston, an overriding objection from the Highways Authority, which would mean it has been excluded, then we should be including those sites. This site falls into that category. There are clearly issues raised about it, but I suggest that the removal of it would send a message to a planning inspector and to our neighbouring authorities that we weren't genuinely serious about trying to meet the housing need, which we're under an obligation to do. So I would rather that it is retained and that the detailed technical case, which, as I've said, is considerably above my head level in terms of expertise, is dealt with in the proper process, which is the one that the planning inspector would be addressing. That's my advice, and it will be my advice to council as well.
Thank you. Can I ask a further question, probably for you, Sarah, which is just for clarity for Cabinet and members of the public as well. Just because a site is allocated in the local plan doesn't, of course, mean that it will necessarily be developed. And I think from what you were saying about this particular site, there are reasons to think that if it is developed, it would be developed very sensitively and with relatively, possibly with relatively fewer houses on it than the original allocation in the last local plan. Would that be a fair way of summarising it?
I think I wouldn't want to say that about the number of houses. All I'd say is, yes, the allocation doesn't mean that the site has to be developed however it comes forward. Obviously, an application will be determined independently. So all the allocation does is identify a site and also set out criteria to make sure that when it does come forward, that it does respond to the sensitivities which are known. So the main point of the site allocations is to say, this is what needs to be responded to in the proposals that come forward, and to make determination easier, because what's before you can then be seen to see whether it does respond to those appropriately or not.
Thank you very much. That's helpful clarification. Any further questions or comments? Nigel?
I don't think I want to let it pass without making a number of comments, all complimentary. First of all, I would say that, obviously there's been a lot of discussion tonight about housing numbers, both in and outside the city, but that's only one side of an equation that involves quality employment, cutting edge businesses, investing in technology, science and medicine, which we are very proud of, and in quality services within the city, and also the ability to provide good health and social services as well. You can't get those things if people have nowhere to live, near you, in the city, or alongside it. So while I'm not going to comment on individual sites, the merits, that's not the appropriate thing to do, but the philosophical point needs to be made, I think, that you can't see housing in isolation from those things. And if you believe in those things, and I can't think that many people in the city wouldn't want those things, then you also need to have enough houses for people to live in. The second thing I would say that all of us as councillors meet people who are in housing distress to some extent or another. We have 3,000 people on the council house waiting list. We have many in the private sector who, despite our excellent efforts of regulation, live in difficult circumstances, often in overcrowding. And this is one of the hidden sort of scourges of life in this city, often paying very high rents for those facilities. So if we're going to do anything about that, we have to up the amount of housing being built in and near the city in order to cope with that demand. So those are kind of the philosophical points I wanted to make, Chair, and I think they should be just said really here. And the other point I want to say is that this piece of work is, I think, alongside the budget, Alex, the most difficult thing this council attempts to do. And therefore, I think we owe you a debt of gratitude and officers, because without your expertise, we wouldn't be in a position to submit this plan with confidence. So I think we owe you a big thank you. And your colleagues too, because this is on a scale of something that there's nothing in my portfolio, for instance, anywhere near as complicated as this, and I acknowledge that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nigel. Yeah, and I think one of the key issues for me as well is the risks of not having a local plan approved, which I think we have covered to some extent, but we need to make sure that whatever we put in front of an inspector, we get through this time. I mean, I frankly found it very hard to understand why it didn't get approved last time. I think we were all a bit shocked by that, considering the very real housing needs that we have in this city and the fact that government had just changed the figures to increase our housing need. It seemed particularly bizarre that the planning inspector chose to not think that we had a substantial housing need. Anyway, we move on, but obviously the risks of not having a local plan for sites across the city would be significant. So I think it is really important that we get this through the process, and that means having a robust local plan proposal that we put forward. And for all the reasons as well that Councillor Chapman just outlined, I mean, I think he's absolutely right. All of us who are councillors unfortunately face people on a daily basis who are living in real housing difficulty, who are living in overcrowded accommodation, who are living in unstable accommodation, unsuitable accommodation, and the very real need for people to have decent homes is quite overwhelming. But he's also right, it isn't just about that, it's also about making sure that we have a plan that makes our city a fantastic place to live, and getting that balance right. So employment, leisure, biodiversity, all of those things in balance are the critical things that we look for in a local plan, and which I think this local plan delivers. So I will go back to you, Alex, if there's anything you want to say in summary. But other than that, I think we're probably moving to a point where we will take a vote.
Yeah, my only comment is to thank Nigel, but by suggesting I was responsible for this, I think yes, I think it's the and. I was going to say I wanted to just make sure that both for our public records and also for everyone here, the huge amount of work that has been put in, not just to the technical evidence on which this is based and which you are not necessarily seeing because there's many thousands and thousands of pages of it, but my contribution, which may be greeted with enthusiasm or not, depending on who you ask, was the rewriting, the restyling, which you can see. I think our current local plan, the 36 local plan, is a pretty decent one. This one, I think, is sharply better in the way that it's structured and the way that it's laid out, the way that it's written, the way that it is accessible. Obviously, it's not just us. The government has decided that they're inspired by our efforts to rewrite our local plan and have rewritten the NPPF in a similar, possibly, way of being accessible. the huge amount of work that Sarah and her team put into the writing of this, I think we need to give credit to. I think it is a much better, imaginative, interesting, accessible document, and I think it, irrespective of one's views on the policies, I think the way that is presented, I think, is something we should give credit to. And so, with that, I would like to, I don't know, move that we send it forward to full council, where it will doubtless be debated with many amendments at great length. So do make sure you've read every chapter, so you're on top of every single element of it.
Thank you very much, Alex. I'm sure we all will spend every moment between now and council in doing just that. There are 6 recommendations that we are making to council set out in this report. But I think it's important to recognise this is not the end of the road. Council has the final decision on the local plan. But are we happy to support those recommendations to council? Thank you very much. That is unanimous. So thank you very much. I absolutely want to echo the comments that have been made about thanking your team. Sorry, it's not over yet. Quite a long way to go, unfortunately. So, but thank you very much. We are now on to item 11 on the agenda, which is the write-off of commercial tenant rent arrears. Is that report one? Sorry. Yes. So Ed is not here. So Ted, are you happy to present the report?
I can do a summary. Yes, that's fine. So this relates to writing off one debt that has been outstanding. It relates to a tenant that was trading on George Street and has since gone into administration. Following the administration, there were no funds left within the business. So we didn't receive any dividend payout from the administrator, and the company has since been dissolved. There's no ability for us to recover any of these arrears, so we're recommending that they are written off.
Thank you very much, Ted. Now I'm conscious of the fact there is an exempt report here. Does anyone need to move into confidential session to ask any questions, or is everyone satisfied they've read the report and understand? I'm not seeing anyone wanting to move into confidential session. That's a relief. So thank you very much. I think under the circumstances, it seems like a fairly straightforward, we need to agree this. So is everyone happy to agree it? Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ted. So we are now on to HRA policies, and over to you, Linda. And I think we have James and Neris here as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's 2 policies on the agenda this evening for us to agree on: electrical safety and Legionella. We've already approved policies on damp and mould, fire safety, asbestos and disrepair. Obviously these are quite technical reports, but I think what is important for us to understand is that they set out the high standards that we are setting for ourselves in terms of the maintenance of our council properties. And what's really important is that these are now these aren't just operational guidance or technical notes for ODS to work to. These are published policies that will be there for residents to refer to and hold us to account, and to make sure that we are keeping up to those high standards that we're setting ourselves and which are expected from us by the social housing regulator.
Thanks very much, Linda. James, Neris, did you want to add anything?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. May I first of all thank the residents who participated on the Residents Policy Review Group. They went through 2 very technical documents on a voluntary basis. Their commitment, I think, is to be thanked, and they did actually change the policies to a substantial extent to reflect the lived-in experiences of the residents. And I think it shows yet again how policy should not be written by officers, whether in lounges or in offices, but they should be written with the lived-in experiences of our residents. It's absolutely fundamental. In terms of the policies that have been introduced by Councillor Smith, I just refer first of all to the electrical safety policy. This reflects the need for electrical condition inspection reports, or EICRs, to be maintained and provided. This is a legal requirement, but nonetheless the policy is very specific that if there's an immediate issue, which are known as C1 within the EICR setup, there would be an immediate response. And if it was C2, then slightly lower than in an urgent issue, there'll be a response within 30 days. So again, it shows the commitment to ensure that the safety of residents is paramount, and the policy was amended to ensure, further to the residents' advice, to ensure it was easier for residents to report concerns, which was not originally reflected in the initial draft. So again, that was really helpful. In terms of Legionella, I should say, as colleagues will probably be aware, this is a type of pneumonia, and tragically it can be fatal. And within the report, you will see the list of symptoms, which are terrible to read, but are a fact of reality. And Legionella is caused by bacteria, which is common in water systems in nature, and therefore it's common in hot and cold water systems, such as hot and cold systems in our homes. And so therefore there is a need for a Legionella policy on a systematic basis, let alone the reasons that Councillor Smith rightly said in terms of regulatory basis, which is also critical. And so what this policy states is what needs to be put in place. And I should add that it's normally assessed that people who are middle age, older people, people who are habitual smokers, people who may suffer from alcohol abuse, and people with respiratory conditions are particularly prone to Legionella issues. Consequently, the policy states that for vulnerable residents, there would be weekly actions in those blocks where there are vulnerable residents that would be informed by the data held within the council and the HRA. And for other particular facilities, there would be monthly checks. There is a risk when it comes to the Legionella issue of sometimes you may have to increase the temperature, and that can, for vulnerable tenants and residents, lead to a risk of scalding. So therefore there is various technical mechanisms known as thermostatic mixing valves that would be introduced that would help blend a mixture of hot and cold temperatures. So overall, the two policies, with the electrical policy also covering issues such as carbon monoxide alarms, heat alarms, smoke alarms, and also lighting, and also the robust measures in the Legionella policy. We believe that these are robust and are in the best interests of keeping the residents safe first, foremost, and always.
Thank you very much. It's a really helpful introduction. Has anyone got any questions or comments? I'm not seeing any. I think these feel like very thoroughly consulted upon and drawn up policies that we would want to adopt for all the reasons given. So with that in mind, can we, we're recommended to approve them both. Can we do so? Thank you very much. And thank you very much. But don't go, because we move on to leasehold consultation and tender process. And over to you again, Linda.
Thank you. Yes, we're planning to spend approximately £9 million over the next 5 years on our council properties in areas including fencing, railings, gates and walls, internal and external communal areas, roofing, doors and windows. Our council tenants will be paying for that through their rents, but it's right that leaseholders pay their share as well. And we anticipate about a third of that £9 million could potentially be recovered from leaseholders. So this report really sets out a tender process to set up a framework to handle the procurement of those works, really to speed up the process and simplify it and make it easier to reclaim those costs from our leaseholders as we go through that programme of works. I'll leave it there. The officers might have more to add.
Thank you very much, Linda. James Harris.
Thank you, Councillor. And further to Councillor Smith's comments, I'd just like to say that this report and this recommendation states that there should be a systematic approach from now on in terms of the sensible recovery of costs contributing to the HRA budget. It also is a direct consequence of the decision of the Cabinet in December 2024 in terms of the 40-year business plan and the asset management strategy. I should say that this is the process that's described in there is commonly known as Section 20 under the Landlord and Tenant Act 1985, but actually it's been amended by Section 151 of the Common Hold and Leasehold Reform Act 2002, but commonly it's called Section 20. And this does state that any costs of capital works which will be above £250 would lead to this process. I should add that this would be a full consultation process once the framework agreement and the procurement team within the City Council agrees and processes that framework agreement with a number of contractors that would be on the framework. And the costs and the quality of the contractors would then be presented to the leaseholders, over 700 of them in the city, for their consideration. And so there's a full democratic and consultation process. I should also say that within the report, we do state that there would be, that the council would work with each individual leaseholder in terms of repayment issues. So it would be sensitive to the needs of each individual leaseholder on a case-by-case basis. There is, of course, a case law that governs this issue, and there is various matters that I could reflect further on. And of course, this policy is cognizant of the decision of the government to amend leasehold, and that is something that the Housing Service is monitoring on a regular basis as that debate continues.
Thank you very much. Have people got any questions or comments on this? Alex?
Yes, I'm very supportive of this. I think the situation quite often that leasehold properties, the maintenance has been not quite as predictable as one would like, I think is at times is probably how I would put it. So this creation of a clear programme to cover all leasehold properties and to recover the costs is absolutely critical. The kind of question I had, I guess, is there are obviously quite a lot of properties which might be ad hoc, and I say that as a representative. Council represents lots of sort of slightly older buildings, which include some of these. So I wanted to just make sure that those were included within this programme, because while a tower block or a block of apartments or something like that is quite often a standard building, something that is considerably older with one property which is in the HRA and one which is in the private sector is slightly less predictable, just to make sure that those are included. And also a comment and it, kind of a question that follows from it. One of the things which this will do, I think, is catch up on work which perhaps is a little overdue and maybe a little more costly than one would hope as a result of that. Just want to be clear, will we be having a programme with the timetable by address available to members as well as to the leaseholders in question? Because that would be a very helpful thing for us to be aware of.
Before you answer, can I also ask a question, which is, many of our leasehold properties are actually tenanted by other people other than the leaseholders. Is there any way in which we can try and ensure that those tenants don't have all the costs passed on to them?
Thank you, Councillor. In terms of the first question, yes, it would cover all ad hoc properties. It covers all leasehold properties within the HRA remit, as it were. So absolutely, that would be the case. Secondly, in terms of a timetable by the address, the answer to that is yes. So in fact, on each financial year, once the Capital Works programme is confirmed, it would be advertised on the City Council's website, subject to the decision of this Cabinet tonight. In terms of the final question, Councillor, in terms of costs being passed on, I think that's something we will have to take away. I think it is problematic because under the legislation, under the section, what is commonly known as the Section 20 process, it is linked directly to the leaseholder, and the leaseholder has the right to therefore rent their property as a direct consequence. How we could legally do that, I'm not quite certain, but we can take that away and check with our legal colleagues.
Thank you. I kind of suspected that was going to be the answer, but I am just a bit concerned about it because, yeah, I mean, there are obviously arguments if you're the actual leaseholder that you might need to sort of share some of the costs, but equally the benefit for some of the works will largely sit with the leaseholder rather than their tenant, I would argue. Anyway, Councillor Smith.
I thought perhaps it was worth mentioning the Renters' Right and the Renters' Right Act and the fact that private landlords can only raise rents once a year, which is kind of relevant.
It is. That's a very good point. Yeah, thank you. So hopefully that will potentially help. Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for this. I think this is very welcome. So can we agree the recommendations as set out in the report? Thank you very much. That was unanimous. So thank you both very much. You are now free to go, I think. Don't think we've got any more for you on the agenda. So we now move on to the workforce report. So Councillor Chapman, and I think we have Gail Malkin online as well.
We do, and we also have Sobia Afridi, who's the EDI specialist. Well, she was there a little while ago.
But she seems to have disappeared.
Just disappeared. Sorry, I was looked up earlier. She was there anyway. So I'm sure that Gail, and if Sobia returns, will be happy to answer some of the more detailed statistical questions that lie at the heart of this report. So I will stand back, frankly, and give you a bit of an overview. This report is a snapshot of the state of affairs in the council on the 31st of March 25. So we're always about 10 months behind when we present this. It also covers the gender pay gap, which we're obliged to publish, and our ethnic minority staff pay gap, which is a voluntary thing which we do and have done for a number of years, and also our disabled staff pay gap. So it includes data on that, and I will come to those figures later, because I want to stand back and say I think this is broadly a very positive story. We've been working hard in this area now for a number of years to try and diversify the City Council's workforce and to get more people with protected characteristics into senior positions and roles. And I think the initiatives that the team have put together and worked really hard on are gaining traction. I'm particularly proud of the positive action work we're doing at the moment. Many councils shy away from positive action. They kind of confuse it with positive discrimination. It's not the same thing at all. And we have been quite bold in our development of staff training programs in relation to positive action, which are starting to have impact and giving people with protected characteristics the confidence to apply for more senior roles in the organisation, which is very, very important. The council's workforce is becoming more diverse in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of disability, and in terms of LGB staff in particular too. And we set a quite tough target of 17%, roughly 17%, which we discussed earlier in the meeting, and we are pretty well there on ethnicity. On disability, the percentage of staff who tell us they are disabled, because this is a voluntary thing. You know, you can't force people to speak up on these matters, but these are the data we have in front of us. Is an improvement on the previous year. There are more disabled staff in senior grades than there were last year. And LGB staff are also at a level which reflects society. So, you know, one of the things we're trying to do in the workforce plan is reflect the people we serve, the world we live in, the city we live in. And actually, when you look at that, they're pretty good numbers, frankly. There's still some way to go in ethnicity, but on the others, sort of a proportion, except from, if you look at society, from which we draw our talent. There are gaps in our knowledge. There are a percentage of staff who don't want to declare, don't want to tell us about their particular characters. I would urge them and encourage them at every opportunity. I did it with the unions only early this week, right? To say, please come forward, because you can't plan a good workforce plan if you don't know your statistics. And there's about 10, 12% of staff who don't want to talk to us about their ethnic minority position, and similarly in relation to some of the other categories I talked about. But they, you know, in the way that sort of, you can have statistics, you can have strategy, but you also have to have culture. And what's good about this report is it's very clear and has really good evidence about the positive culture in the organisation. Whether it's the EDI audit, whether it's the staff survey. I mean, you know, 91% said they value diversity. 91%, 94% roughly said they found the workplace safe and inclusive. Very important words that in this context. If you don't feel the workplace is safe and inclusive, why would you want to come and work here if you're from a group with a protected characteristic? Annual staff survey results, 94% say we respect people's differences, you know, whatever they are. So again, I think that's really, really important, and that's a very solid foundation on which to build. I would like then to say that the gender pay gap numbers and the ethnic minority pay gap numbers sort of reflect this kind of progress. They are a sort of outcome of statistics in the end, and they're quite sensitive to small movements. And so, you know, our gender pay gap's gone up a little bit. Our median pay gap for gender is now at 3% when it was at 0 last year. But you have to put that in the context of a national figure of 12.5%. So it's way, way, way down on that sort of number. And similarly, there's been a bit of sort of drift away from parity in some of the other areas I talked about earlier on. I mean, it's not awful, and you'd like to redress it. And how do you redress it? You only can redress it really by doing a number of things, but one in particular, which is getting more people with protected characteristics into senior roles in the organisation, because it is these numbers are a subject of mathematics in the end. And if you do not have enough women and ethnic minorities in senior roles, you will have a pay gap. That's just the facts of life. And therefore, we need to do more on that. But I say, generally speaking, I think it's a very positive report, a lot of work to be proud of. And I particularly pay tribute to Gail and to Sobia for all the hard work they do. I mean, we don't invest a lot of money in this area, actually. If you see the big scheme of things, of what the council spends, we're getting a lot of bang for our buck, frankly, here. And I'm very proud of the work they've done. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nigel. Gail, would you like to add anything?
No, I don't have anything to add. I think Nigel's done a good summary. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anyone got any questions or comments? Not seeing any. I feel like I've had quite a good briefing on this week, because we had a very good discussion at the partnership meeting as well. So in which case, can we move to the recommendations, which are to approve the contents, delegate authority to the head of people to publish the workforce equality report, approve the contents of the gender pay gap, ethnicity pay gap and disability pay gap, and publish those as well. Everyone happy to agree those recommendations?
Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you very much, Gail. Thank you from us. We appreciate the work that's going on in this area and progress that's being made. So thank you. That we move to our final report of the night, which is another one in Ed's name, and I'm not going to try and introduce this. I think it's probably better if you do, Nigel. So over to you for the Treasury Management Mid-Year Review for April to September 2025.
I'll give it a go. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you. So this is the midterm report for position on treasury management as at the end of September 2025. Just some of the highlights, actually, it shows our investments at that point to be around 66 million. And a net favourable variance on net interest, basically just over £2 million, which is reflected in the latest budget monitoring report that will be coming forward to Cabinet in a month or so's time. Within the investments are our pooled funds. These consist of mainly property funds and also multi-asset funds, basically, which are generally sort of stocks and shares and other holdings of that kind. In terms of our property funds, some of the property funds are earning, or both of them are earning around 5 to 6%, actually, which is well above the current bank base rate of 3.75%. And the growth on CCLA has been about 20% since its inception, actually. In terms of Lothbury, there's a little bit of downturn on that particular one. But again, if you'd held the investment in a bank, basically, it's certainly outstripped by the amount that we've got from Lothbury over that period of time. In terms of our multi-asset funds, again, tale of two halves. One is earning around 26% increase in our investment since its inception, and the other one is slightly down. These are long-term funds, and providing you're not looking to take your money out, which we aren't, basically, then over time, basically, they will recover, actually. But that's the position at the moment. If you look at the benchmarks compared to the returns from other organisations and local authorities, you'll see that Oxford City Council has fared well compared to the risk that we've taken on. Basically, there's a risk indicator which is calculated by our consultants, and risk versus reward, basically, we fare pretty well, actually. Just a couple of other points, basically, to note on this report. One, borrowing at this point in time is around 288 million. That is all HRA debt and is all funded from the HRA. And lastly, just to confirm that we've operated within all our prudential indicators that were agreed by Council in this Treasury Management Strategy for 25-26. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Somewhat better introduction, I think, than I could have given to the report. So has anyone got any questions? Joy, I would have expected nothing less. So over to you.
Yes, thank you. I mean, this is a good report, and I'm happy to learn, obviously, the investment of 6 million and the return 2 million. So my question really is just to look at the current situation. I mean, the markets at the moment, when you talk about the FTSE 100, it's over the limit. It's 10,000. It has never gone up to. And we can also look at everywhere, NASDAQ, it's the same thing. And when I read the reports, there's some indication that, you know, it can only go down, obviously, because of the investment in AI, because it has pushed up the market. So I just wanted to find out, obviously, if there's a bug, then probably you balance the risk, as you are saying. Maybe we won't be affected, but overall market, we can be affected. So I just wanted to hear your opinion or what mitigation you are taking, not specifically for us, but just on the global market. Thank you.
Yeah, obviously, you know, investments can go up as well as go down, actually. At this point in time, say we held total investments of 66 million. 13 million of that in the pool funds is considered to be higher risk than the rest of it, actually. The vast bulk of our investments are held in fixed rate maturities, largely with banks. So there is limited risk on there. In terms of the pooled funds, yes, you're taking on a little bit more risk, but equally, you know, when you're getting 20% growth and 6% rate of return, basically, arguably you're getting more reward. The report lays out that there are certain overrides given to local authorities, which basically preclude us having to charge any reductions in those holdings, basically, to our revenue account. So we are protected to some extent by that. That override runs out in a few years' time. Basically, the government keep extending it basically for local authorities, but it runs out in a few years' time. But it's equally fair to say that we hold earmark reserves and provisions basically to cover that. So we protect the revenue account should there be any diminution in value. But yeah, I mean, overall, as I say, investments can go up as well as they go down.
Thank you. Any further questions? No. Okay. In which case, we're actually just being asked to note the performance. So can we duly note, please? Noted. Thank you. And thank you very much, Nigel. I only falls for me now to remind you the date of the next Cabinet meeting is the 11th of February. I therefore declare this meeting closed. Thank you.